But first, it is time to bring in Keith Wood this morning. Morning, Keith. How are things?
Good morning, gents. How are you?
Keeping well. Thanks for hopping on. We're always finding new ways to stress you out and come up with lists and numbers and names. But this is not an easy one either. But it's your current World 15. Was this a stressful one?
Yeah, it was a stressful one. I'm beginning to dislike the texts that are coming in from producer Colm on a Tuesday. He's ruining every single Tuesday night for me. I hate lists with a passion. I mean, it's like, you try as you get older to do things that you really like to do, and I'm having to do something I don't like all the time. I hate bests of. They give me ire, to be honest. But the idea of trying to go through it it's interesting. We'll know the truth of it, I think, in a couple of months' time. That's the other part. And that's why this is awkward, because you're putting your head in a block for guys who could, gain form, lose form, injured, whatever it is. But what are the criteria? The lack of criteria for Colm is just quite extraordinary. I mean, he hangs me out to dry pretty much every Wednesday morning. So there's no criteria. It's just a message. Who do you think the best team in the world are? Which is bloody awful, actually. There's nothing nice in this at all. So I was pretty busy yesterday, and I was doing this into the very close to midnight before I sent it over to you.
There's not a man in the world.
It's still rubbish.
For as much as you hate those lists, there's not a man alive who loves a list more than Colm. And the less details you get around it, the better, as far as he's concerned. Are you, with these lists, are you cosseting yourself away? Are you dropping out a few texts to a couple of old pals, or how do you go about it? Particularly with a list like that, that's like, it's pretty fraught.
Well, it's important not to hang your friends out to dry either. But I hang my sons out to dry, and I put them, and then of course they got angry with Colm last night. So he has to be careful when he ever comes down to the Wood household. But it's difficult. It's trying to figure it out, and then you get excited by certain ones, and then you're kind of struggling. It's strange. I really struggled in the front row. And that would be my former area of expertise. And because in terms of pure standouts, there are a lot of really good practitioners. So you could actually pick pretty much any of them. And then you look at the back row, and you have a multitude of standouts. And so that makes it really, really interesting. So my list is a list of sorts. Let's put it down as more a discussion document than a definitive list. And now that's about 15 caveats I've put in already this morning. But that just shows you how uncomfortable I am with it. So
I guess in a World Cup, you are this close to a World Cup, Keith, there has to be a little bit of shithousery here. You don't want to pick too many Irish lads. You want to kind of be a bit like a Kerry man and play down the chances here.
Yeah, you know what? I try not to do that. I mean, I get caught up in the excitement as everybody else does when we do well, but I try not to. And I think when you're looking at what's a World 15, you're trying to say who are the best players in the world at this moment in time. Now, that could be different from 3 months ago, and it could be different from 3 months from now. And it's why I hate lists. So when you go and look at these things and you say who are the great players that you've played with or against, or who are the great players that you've watched, you can talk about them, but don't put them in order of form, because again, the criteria are so wide. Are they coming back from injury? Are they not coming back from injury? Have they enough experience, or have they pure youths with no fear? What sort of team are they playing with? Is that team a winning team? You can have great players who aren't playing in winning teams. You can have players that are very, very good, but when they play with the All Blacks, they win 91% of their matches, or whatever it is. So it becomes easier for them. So you can back yourself into psychosis trying to get your head around this entirely. So I like it for a discussion, but it isn't definitive. That's why I hate lists, but it's good for fun. I try not to pick Irish players if I don't think they're good enough, actually, as opposed to trying to say I'm not picking them for shithousery and trying to lull people into a false sense of security. I also, I just think there's fun in it too, but fun and a little bit of grief.
I'm looking at the names, so we'll get into it, Keith, and your 15, because it's some unbelievable names in here, in fairness. So we'll start with the wingers. So I think you've got Hugo Keenan. You've got
Keenan fullback.
Sorry, Keenan fullback, of course. Will Jordan is in there.
Yeah.
You have, sorry, I'm just trying to make sense of this. So you have Damien Penaud as well, the Bordeaux winger.
It's very hard to make sense of this because there isn't just 15 names on that list.
Well, some positions are
kind. Not to say. Look, I think if I look at Keenan first. There's loads of players that you can put in. You can put in Ramos, who's been phenomenal. Barrett at 15 is phenomenal. I'm just looking at a level of consistency of performance, of excellent performance. And I think he makes pretty much any list at the moment. I'm a big fan. He's an unlikely looking rugby player. He's not huge, but his effectiveness is incredible. So I enjoy watching him. I'm excited watching him, and maybe that's one of the factors for my list, or who are the ones that kind of raise the blood level, that say, wow, he's a guy that you'd want to see in a rugby field.
Keenan, I think he probably has to be in any World 15, doesn't he, at the moment, certainly on form. And he's timed it perfectly, Keith, as well, hasn't he? Because in a World Cup year, to be reaching these levels of his powers is just incredible. It's almost Stockdale 2018. You want to be peaking at the right time.
Yeah, it's look, you want to peak all the time. That's you wouldn't believe how greedy sportsmen are. They want their that sweet spot to, where they're in their zone or things are going right for them. They want that to extend to a career. They don't want it for a period of time. I just think he has played very, very well. I'm going to be really interested to see how, not just the Irish guys, but actually the Northern Hemisphere guys in particular, how they come out of this World Cup training camps, to see how they are, whether they're rejuvenated or whether they're knackered. Because we've seen in times past where 2007, when went to the World Cup with a really good team, and they just seem to have got their training wrong. They came out of it flat. They didn't quite get to the beat of any of the games, and they limped out of the World Cup. And it was a shame for the quality of the team that we had. And you can see even on the last World Cup, it didn't work either. So I'm interested to see what Farrell has managed to do with the Irish team, what Borthwick has managed to do with the English team, because they've been a bit of a shambles. So. And then, of course, what Galtier has done with the French team, because they've been on a high for so much, and their club teams have been on a high. How are they actually going to get to the level that they want to in their home World Cup? So, yeah, I'm kind of intrigued with some of those sort of things.
As we work through the team, the one thing about the lists, Keith, is that we'll find in the comments that people are, how has he not mentioned X, right? And no matter if you were going till tomorrow, you won't have mentioned the A to Z enough for people. But just in terms, will you talk us through any of the options that you feel are mention worthy, particularly in relation to the wings there, other players that might have come into your thinking?
Well, look, I've Jordan and Penaud on the wings. It was really interesting watching Penaud at the end of the season make 2 mistakes and then be the difference for them winning that championship match. I just love I love the ability of a player that makes a mistake, doesn't go into a shell, is actually amazing. There's very few people do that. Most, when you make a mistake, and you'd recommend from a psychological point of view, you try and do the next couple of things simply. But it's the truly great ones are the ones that make a mistake and then still have the confidence and the skill level and the attention to be able to do something magnificent. So I think he offers something amazing. Will Jordan has been a big loss. He's been injured for a while, lost for in New Zealand. Him back gives them a cutting, threatening edge, sort of thinking edge from the back three that they haven't had for a while. And they always seem to have a couple of those players that are just different, like electric pace. So if I was looking at him, I'd be saying he's a guy to watch out for in the World Cup. I think he'll be extraordinary.
In the centre, Keith, you've gone for Lukanyuam, who can also play on the wing, of course, with the Sharks, and Jonathan Daunty, who, of course, Rog has spoken about plenty on this show. So that's not a bad set of partnership.
No, you could have Barrett, the other Barrett, or one of the other Barretts in the centre as well, because he's now seeming to make 12 his own in New Zealand. Of course, you could have. Hinshaw isn't far away from that at all. Ringrose isn't far away from 13. Dante causes carnage wherever he is and still has a level of subtlety, and I think he's one of the most influential players. Again, coming back from injury, he's a guy he is getting his timing right coming back for it. Lucanio Am for me is, I think, consistently underrated as a 13. He just he kind of gets bypassed because of his subtlety in a Springbok team, but he gives them a really good cutting edge. The speed that they have on the outside are only ever released because of the timing of his pass often. And so I'm a fan of his, and again, he hasn't quite been at the height, but I think he'll be a guy to watch out for the World Cup.
Yeah, and the Kanyuam as well. There's talk of Sia Khaleesi is absent at the moment with a bit of an injury, but his name has been mentioned, the Kanyuam, as one of these leaders in that South African panel, I guess, that could pick up the captaincy if needed. So clearly he's one of these players that leads as well as does.
Yeah. Look, it looks like it consistently. I mean, I know that there was a view in past times that Dialende would have captaincy type material. I don't know that that's ever really come to the fore. But I think if you can have a cool head, and Lucanio Ham tends to have that cool head in the field.
Number 10, you've gone with another All Black, Richie Mo'unga.
I have, just because I was watching him play. He's had a battle for most of his career to try and get into the 10 jersey, and Bowden Barrett being pretty incredible, McKenzie being pretty incredible, and Mo'unga. I just watched him play last weekend, and this is absolute recency bias. I just thought he really, really managed the game incredibly well, but also took control for some of the longer kicks, which he doesn't ordinarily do. And because normally they give it to Jordy Barrett because he can bang it over from pretty much anywhere, and was nailing everything. I thought he showed a level of control, and it looks like the All Blacks are getting a sense of control that they lost for a while. And I thought they were really impressive last week. So, look, it's him. It could be Andre Pollard, who's injured. Johnny, of course, who has been injured since February. That's one of the reasons he's not in there. But I think if you're looking at even the last couple of weeks, he showed a level of maturity that that the All Blacks need, actually, because they often rely almost entirely on talent, but you need your 10 to have that real maturity to manage the game as much as possible and manage the players around him, and I thought he did that.
We're not going to have any debate about 9, so let me ask you just one on that. If you were on that 10, if you're picking a team to start a World Cup final tomorrow in some hypothetical scenario like we're in at the minute, and you're saying it is Mo'unga over Sexton et al.
Yeah, I see. That's why this whole argument falls down, Adrian, and that's why it was great to see you a couple of weeks ago. I've now gone off you already, So that idea,
Adrian, I call him now. Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, of those hypotheticals, like Mo'unga is playing really well in an All Black team. I have to say, I think Johnny Sexton could play well in a lot of different teams. But they'd have to be, because he tends to make an awful lot more decisions in a game. And I think the way Ireland are set up is it is on your 10 making as many decisions in a game as you possibly can. And with Johnny making the right decision. But he has 5 or 6 options every single time he gets the ball. That's the difference. So I think you can drop him in anywhere. But that's where this argument kind of falls down. It all depends on the style you're going to play. It all depends on, are you going to play very much a kicking game or a running game, whatever it is. So again, I don't have a proper answer for that. I'm falling into a toilet of words there, trying to justify. It's impossible one to,
and it's because is X a better player than Y, but then also all the intangibles like leadership and experience and.
It's why I'm going to block Colm from Tuesday texts. I think that's probably
we should all. I think we could all learn a lesson from that.
Because then you have to also think about it. Is this a World 15 that would play well together, or is this a World 15 based on are they the best in their individual positions? But of course, Keith Colm did not make that clear, which makes your job even more difficult.
The 5-word texts tend to be the norm with Colm, so we're not talking about clarity in any way.
Colm's getting thrown under the bus here. Richie Moore got a definite good pick either way. Keith at number 10 and a lovely try at the end of that game against South Africa recently as well. It timed his run perfectly. So no one's going to judge you for that one. No one's going to judge you for your choice at number 9. As Adrian said, there's probably no point dwelling on it. Antoine Dupont, I think, is the best number 9 in the world.
He is. It's funny because watching again last weekend, looking at Aaron Smith's display of, I would say, technical brilliance, his fitness, over 100 caps, still looks as fresh as a daisy. The quality of his passing is phenomenal. His fitness. Faf de Klerk, who was buzzing like a swirling dervish for the length of time he was on. They're phenomenal, and we're blessed, I think, at the moment with the quality of them. But Dupont just holds out a different, and it's different as well because in France the guy who runs the game is a 9. It's not a 10. So you'll often see Dupont take the ball and run backwards. He's trying to figure out what he's going to do, which Galtier used to do 20 years ago, and but his strength, his capacity to link, his thinking around the game is just phenomenal. So he gets it, of course he does.
Zero arguments on that pick. Number 8, Keith, you've got a choice here. So this is a difficult one: Caelan Doris or Gregory Aldred.
Well, look, the back 3 I found to be incredibly difficult. Look, I'm Caelan Doris all the way. And I know Jack Conan has done incredibly well. I still think Ireland are a better team with Caelan Doris at 8. You have Aldred, who I have to say is one of my favourite players.
Yeah.
I've watching the back row. If you were picking a back row, you'd pick en masse. You'd pick the French back row. You'd pick Aldred, Olivon, and Challenge. They're extraordinary, and they're a joy to watch in the physicality, but also the skill level. But I think Doris has. At 8, because it just seems to be his more natural position. He seems to have that extra little bit of time to make his decisions, the extra little bit of space, his feet before contact, the growth actually in his ability to take a risk with the pass, and then complete the pass. So everybody can take a risk with a pass falling or under huge contact, but it's then making certain that it actually works. I just think he's as good as we've two guys in the pack for me that are as good as we've seen in Ireland. So I think that's very rare to have that anyway, and I think that's kind of a joy. So I'd go for him over Aldred, even though Aldred's one of my favourite rugby players to watch.
Okay. A blindside, you mentioned him already, Olivon, of course, unbelievable for Toulon last year as well, and open side. Again, this is a
I've kind of gone a bit of a blend of both, so I'm not exactly right with it. I've gone for Ardi Savea in the back row as well with Olivon. Olivon again was injured for a huge period of time, came back and reached a level of performance and an extra level of subtlety to France's back row, which I thought was amazing. Ardi Savea has been one of those dolls you can't knock over, they just kind of rock back up onto their feet. He's consistently been, the best back row forward in New Zealand for about 5 years.
Anthony Jalanche is a name you mentioned, is another option there, and Josh van der Fleer, I guess.
Van der Fleer has been Van der Fleer is integral to every single thing that Ireland do. He plays at a really great level of performance. I don't know that he's quite at the same level as he was last year, and so I'll be interested to see how he reacts to that for this World Cup. So, and it's not that he has dropped but I think some other guys are bringing more to their game. I'm arguing with myself. I love Van der Fleer. I just think he plays brilliantly all the time. So look, we could put a load of Irish guys down here and a load of French guys, intersperse it with a few South Africans, and well, that's actually what we've done pretty much. South Africans and a couple of All Blacks.
It's a nice mix. It's a nice mix. Yeah. And even in the second row, you've got Brodie Retallick and I think Eben Etzebeth as your final two picks.
Yeah, I'm a little bit bored myself with that, because those guys have been around for quite a while. I love Flamand. I think he's fantastic. I even have Skelton in there because he's been the bane of so many teams at a club perspective. I don't think he's quite having that impact at international now. He's back in the Australian in the setup again. I thought Retallick was incredible again last week, and Etzebeth is. Do you know what? He's a big guy, but I watched him beside RG Snyman the other day, and he looked almost bigger than Snyman, and Snyman is a giant, and look, the impact he has and the impact he will have on this World Cup, I think, will be pretty stark.
Loosehead Andrew Porter, close but no cigar.
I don't know, and maybe this could be part of that shithousery or not. I think Porter has been very good. He needs to stop giving away penalties. That's one of the important things. And I said I struggled when I got to the front row, actually. I like Stephen Kitsoff, though he always came off the bench. Now he seems to be starting far more often. I think he's had a fairly large impact. A good player. There's any that you could go with. I went with Kitsoff on this, and I think that could be part of that. Let's not pick too many Irish guys. And then, of course, I went with Dan Sheehan at hooker, and I didn't go with anybody else. I just think he's phenomenal. So and this is a great World Cup. He's at a great age for it. He's got a lot of matches under his belt. He's got a work ethic that's pretty phenomenal. He has got Ronan Kelleher pushing behind him, which you can't understate. That he's not allowed to rest on his laurels in any way, shape or form. Again, I think his feet and contact are incredible. His speed is incredible. I think this is his World Cup.
I sort of watching the rugby of the last few weeks, Keith, and listening to you now over the last 20 minutes, I have a growing sweaty palms and concern over the World Cup, where we had sort of collectively reached a decision that New Zealand were not the New Zealand that we thought they were. And listen to you there and the picks that you have in the team, how eloquently you speak about the New Zealand players you've included, and having watched them over the last couple of weeks, I have a growing concern that in a couple of months, a few weeks' time, we're going to be reinstalling them as the hot favourites to win the World Cup.
Well, there's a couple of mad things. That's an entirely different conversation, but our bread and butter and what keeps the game alive in Ireland is the Six Nations, and that is of huge importance. You can't suddenly pick 15 new guys and say, let's try and do this entirely differently. And we have now built up a level of consistency in Six Nations, which is very good for the coffers and keeps the game alive and floating in Ireland, right? So that's a really big thing. It also is a fantastic annual competition that fits into the bleakness of winter and gives people something to support and live for and all that sort of stuff. It's great for the hotels. It's great for everything, right? So all that stuff is fantastic. But the teams that have been more world leaders tend to be England will always do well in the World Cup. They have capacity to do it. Australia do incredibly well in World Cup, even with not a huge number of players. New Zealand are traditionally in around 90%, and they try and peak for World Cups, and they've won a couple. And it annoys them that they've only won a couple. Like, they're almost embarrassed that they haven't won them all, and that's the standard that they take into it. and they got lots of they lost their way for a period of time. A lot of players after Carter held such a huge influence over New Zealand for so long. I think he papered over a fair bit of cracks in the team because he was so brilliant. Actually, he was able to pull the strings when he needed to, and at the end of that, I think they've lost their way a little bit, and I think there's huge pressure on Foster. I think Joe Schmidt's having a fairly big influence in there in terms of some of the structure that's required. It isn't just down to the skills and capabilities of the players. You have to think your way through it an awful lot more. They could rely on their skills for so long when they had a guy like Carter at 10. It's become harder for them. So I think they're growing into it, and I think they'll be phenomenal in the World Cup. And their performance in the last couple of weeks have shown a side to them we haven't seen for 2 or 3 years. Now that doesn't mean that the other teams don't know how to unpick them. So for me, I can't wait for the World Cup for that reason. But and then you have South Africa. South Africa peak and organise every single thing that they have to achieve in the World Cup. Actually, to achieve in the World Cup and to achieve against New Zealand. That's pretty much the South African way. And so I think they'll be fantastic in the World Cup.
That rounds out your team nicely, Keith. So you had Kits off at loose head, just ahead of Porter. You had Dan Sheehan, Tucker, and Antonio, who we didn't mention as the tight head prop as well. La Rochelle man. So look, not an easy one. 3 Irish names in Keenan, Doris, and Sheehan. I think that tempers the expectations nicely. So well done, Keith. Not an easy job. You can block Colm now and sleep well after that.
I'll have to sleep well, yeah. I get a little bit of abuse, but that's okay too.
That's fine. So we all do. That's great. Keith, brilliant stuff. Thanks for hopping on.
Thanks, Keith.
Cheers, gents.